the truth about the resurrection. The Apostle Paul knew how important the resurrection was to the Christian faith. He said if it wasn't true, then we of all people are most to be pitied because we put our faith in the resurrection of the dead. And our faith would totally be in vain. But then he went on to show that it was true. What do you think? Perhaps you're listening to this message because you don't want to believe, but you want some more information. Perhaps you're interested in learning more. I hope this message will help you to hone your belief one way or the other. Firstly, because most of the evidence comes from the New Testament, it's important to investigate how reliable and accurate the New Testament is. There are 3 tests a historian can use to determine the accuracy of an ancient document. There's the bibliographic test, the internal test, and the external test. Let's see how these apply to the New Testament. Firstly, the bibliographic test. This looks at the ancient manuscripts and asks the question, is the text of the New Testament the same as the original? The simple answer is yes. There are thousands of ancient manuscripts compared to a few manuscripts for similar ancient documents which are counted as valid, such as Caesar's Gallic Wars. We have 5,000 Greek manuscripts, hundreds of papyri, almost 350 Syriac copies, most dating to AD 400s. On top of this, virtually the entire New Testament could be reproduced from 32,000 quotations in the writings of the early Church Fathers, which was before the Council of Nicaea in AD 325. Many of these manuscripts are incredibly early. For example, the John Rylands fragment, John's Gospel, P52, which dates to around 120 AD. Codex Sinaiticus dates to about 350 AD and contains virtually all of the New Testament. Study and comparison of these manuscripts enables us to be confident that the text of the Bible we have today is extremely accurate and close to the original. Secondly, there's the internal test. Can we determine if the document we have before us was written by eyewitnesses? Well, firstly, we have multiple witnesses. Many people who are unfamiliar with the Bible tend to think of it as one book. But of course, the Bible contains multiple books. It's more like a library. When we come to the New Testament, for example, we have multiple authors writing about the life of Jesus. Scholars would count at least 6: Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Paul, and probably also Q, which was a collection of sayings that Matthew and Luke refer to. Moreover, these sources are very early. Most scholars date the Gospels from the 60s to 80s AD, although some argue that Mark in particular is much earlier, AD 30 to AD 40. This multiple attestation and early dating is important evidence for the veracity and accuracy of the New Testament. While the evangelists, the writers of the Gospels, clearly had an important theological agenda, they also chose to adapt Greco-Roman biographical conventions to tell their story of Jesus. This indicates that they were concerned to communicate what they really thought happened. If we want to reject the Gospels as history, we still have the problem of explaining the early church. If the life of Jesus and his ministry don't play out as the Gospels claim, we still have to explain where the church came from. The Gospel writers wrote with blatant honesty about their faults. It is recorded that the disciples were so afraid after the crucifixion, they hid behind locked doors. This demoralized Galilean sect went on to turn the world upside down. The only rational explanation is that the New Testament is true. Thirdly, the external test. There is external evidence for the Bible, in particular archaeology. Along with the writings of non-Christian historians from the first century, men like Jewish historian Josephus, archaeology endorses the biblical text at many points. In Acts 17, verses 6 to 8, Luke uses the Greek word politarch to describe the city officials in Thessalonica. That word doesn't appear in classical Greek, so critics accuse Luke of making a mistake. Then archaeologists discovered a first century arch that used this very term, showing that the term was in use for the government officials at the time that Luke was writing. It was similar to the situation with Acts 18 verse 12, where Luke uses the term proconsul to describe a man named Gallio. That word didn't appear in classical literature, so again, scholars questioned Luke's accuracy. Then an inscription was found at Delphi dating to AD 51, using the same term and also to describe the very same official, Gallio. Once again, Luke was proved to be an accurate historian. It's a similar story for the other Gospel writers. For example, John 5, 1-2 says, "There is a pool in Jerusalem by the sheep gate, called in Hebrew Bethesda, which has 5 porticos." Until the 20th century, there was no evidence outside of John's Gospel for such a place. And again, critics questioned John's reliability. Then in the 1930s, the pool was uncovered by archaeologists, complete with 4 colonnades around the edges and 1 across the middle. So we have seen how the New Testament steps up to the tests. Now let's turn to the resurrection. The body of Jesus was laid in a stone tomb with a heavy stone rolled across the entrance. Because Jesus had claimed he would rise from the dead, the Judean authorities had the stone sealed and procured a detachment of Roman guards. Some people think that Jesus was actually not dead, but revived in the cold. But Luke's account says that when Jesus' side was pierced by a spear, water and blood came flowing out. When a person is dead, their blood separates. So there was an observation here that Jesus was dead. After 3 days, some women came to perform a burial ceremony with spices. They found the stone rolled away and no Roman guards. The women were dismayed because Jesus' body wasn't there. The stone was heavy and needed strength to move it. Furthermore, it was sealed to the tomb. There's something very strange here, because if a Roman soldier left his post, it was punishable by death. Something must have driven these battle-hardened soldiers away. Something that caused them to fear for their very lives. The Bible says that an angel came down and there was an earthquake. For certain, something extraordinary must have happened. Then Mary Magdalene had an encounter with a man that she supposed was the gardener. She asked him where they had put her Lord. When he called her by name, she recognized that it was Jesus. When the disciples were hiding behind locked doors for fear of the Jews, Jesus appeared to them. This fear has to be honest. Most people wouldn't admit such a thing. It has to be true. Thomas, one of the 12, wasn't there and said he wouldn't believe unless he could touch the wounds of Jesus. Sometime later, Jesus appeared and invited Thomas to inspect his wounds. Thomas did so, and it's recorded that he fell to his knees and said, "My Lord and my God." But Jesus didn't scold him for worshipping that way. 2 disciples walking to Emmaus claimed they were met by Jesus. Saul of Tarsus was travelling to Damascus with letters of authority to allow him to imprison Christians. He thought zealously that Christianity was false and that Jesus was dead. He claimed he saw a bright light and Jesus on the road, and became blind for 3 days. Thereafter, instead of being a zealous opponent, Saul became the Apostle Paul and regularly risked his life for the faith he once persecuted. Later, the Apostle Paul recorded that Jesus appeared to 500 men at one time, most of whom were alive at the time he wrote his letter to the Corinthians. So they could have been questioned to see if it was true. Josephus was a Jewish historian. As such, he had no reason to favour Jesus and Christians. Nevertheless, he said, quote, "At this time there was a wise man, Jesus, good and virtuous, and many people from among the Jews and the other nations became his disciples. Pilate condemned him to be crucified and to die, and those who had become his disciples did not abandon his discipleship. They reported that he had appeared to them 3 days after his crucifixion, and that he was alive." Antiquities 18:33. The most convincing evidence for the resurrection, however, is the existence of the Christian Church. The disciples were dejected and full of fear after the crucifixion. They're in no fit state to start a church. But later, on the day of Pentecost, Peter stood up and scolded the people with words like, quote, Let all Israel be assured of this: God has made this Jesus, whom you crucified, both Lord and Christ. Close quote. Peter and the others were no longer petrified of the authorities, and they were ecstatic. In fact, they were so happy the other Jews thought they were drunk at first. I find no other explanation for this except the resurrection of Jesus. I hope this short talk has helped you hone what you think. Whether you agree or disagree, I'd still like to hear from you. So you can email me from at h_robinson@live.co.uk. God bless you.